How was I supposed to know that one night of dancing would lead to this moment? How could I have predicted that my quiet, methodical husband would document every single thing I did, every post I made, every time I chose Rafa over him, and turn it all into ammunition for the most devastating revenge I could have imagined? The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick and official, with my name typed across the front in that cold, impersonal font that screams legal document. I stared at it from across the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold as Caleb calmly buttered his toast, not even glancing my way. 6 months ago, I would have laughed if someone told me this is how my marriage would end. With me holding divorce papers while my husband ate breakfast like it was just another Tuesday. But here's the thing everyone needs to understand. I never meant for it to go this far. All I wanted was to feel alive again, to remember what it was like to have fun, to be the center of attention instead of just another boring housewife going through the motions. When Rafa started inviting me out, when he made me feel special and wanted, I thought I was just reclaiming a piece of myself that had gotten lost somewhere between grocery lists and mortgage payments. The bass was pounding so hard I could feel it in my chest as Rafa grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the dance floor. The club was packed, bodies pressed together in the dim lighting, and for the first time in months, I felt truly alive. Behind us, I could see Caleb sitting at our table, nursing his beer and checking his phone with that same distant expression he always wore these days. "Come on, Otily," Rafa shouted over the music, his smile infectious as he spun me around. "This is your song." He was right. The DJ was playing that remix I'd been obsessing over, the one I'd played on repeat during my lunch breaks at work. Rafa remembered things like that. Little details that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. "I should check on Caleb," I said, glancing back toward our table, but Rafa caught my arm. "He's fine. Look at him. He's probably calculating our mortgage payment or something equally thrilling." Rafa's laugh was warm and easy. "When's the last time you just let yourself have fun?" I couldn't remember, honestly. When had Caleb and I stopped dancing? When had date night become sitting in silence at chain restaurants, discussing utility bills and work schedules? When had I become this version of myself, responsible, predictable, boring? "You're right," I said, pushing thoughts of Caleb aside. "Tonight is about me." The next few hours blurred together in a haze of laughter and movement. Rafa introduced me to his friends, other club promoters and social media influencers who lived in a world that seemed so much more vibrant than my cubicle at the insurance office. They took photos and videos, posting them to their Instagram stories with captions like "squad goals" and "living our best life." "Get in here, gorgeous," Nate, one of Rafa's friends, called out as he held up his phone for a group selfie. "This is going straight to the gram." I squeezed between Rafa and another girl, throwing my arms around their shoulders as we posed. The camera flash went off multiple times, capturing our laughing faces and the energy of the night. In that moment, I felt like the person I used to be before marriage and responsibilities weighed me down. "Tag me in everything," I told them, pulling out my own phone to document the night. I posted a video of Rafa and me dancing, captioning it, "When your best friend knows exactly what you need, I'd offer best friend goals, art shall living my best life." It wasn't until nearly 2 a.m. that I remembered to check on Caleb. I found him exactly where I'd left him, still nursing what looked like the same beer, scrolling through his phone with mechanical precision. "Hey, babe," I said, sliding into the booth beside him, still breathless from dancing. "Having fun?" He looked up at me with those gray eyes that used to make my heart skip. Now they just looked tired. "Ready to go?" "All ready. The night's just getting started." I glanced back toward the dance floor where Rafa was waving me over. "Rafa's friends are talking about hitting another spot downtown. It's 2 a.m. Otily. Some of us have work tomorrow." There it was, that tone, the same disapproving, practical tone he used when I bought coffee from Starbucks instead of making it at home, or when I suggested we take a vacation somewhere more exciting than his mother's house upstate. "It's Friday night, Caleb. Live a little." I could hear the edge creeping into my voice, but I was tired of always being the one who had to compromise. "When did you become such an old man?" He didn't answer, just signaled the waitress for the check. The silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken resentments and the pounding bass of the club music. "Fine," I said, standing up. "I'll get a ride with Rafa. You can go home and reorganize your sock drawer, or whatever it is you do for excitement these days." For just a moment, something flickered across Caleb's face. Hurt, maybe, or anger, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. He just nodded and pulled out his wallet. "Text me when you get home safe," he said quietly. I felt a pang of guilt, but Rafa appeared at my elbow before I could say anything else. "Ready for round 2?" he asked, his energy still infectious despite the late hour. "I know this amazing rooftop place that's just getting started." I looked back at Caleb, who was counting out bills for the tip with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else in his life. When had we become these people? When had he become someone who calculated tips while I craved adventure? "Let's go," I told Rafa, and I didn't look back as we headed for the exit. The ride to the rooftop bar was filled with laughter and music, Rafa's friends passing phones around to show each other the best photos from the night. I posted another video from the back seat of the Uber, the city lights streaming past the window as I smiled into the camera. When you realize the night is young, and so are you. Night owl, Anshao, city life, Naishao, best friend adventures. The likes and comments started pouring in immediately. Friends from work, old college acquaintances, even some people I barely knew. All of them celebrating my night of freedom with heart-eye emojis and fire symbols. "You're glowing," Rafa said, leaning over to look at my phone screen. "This is the Otily I remember from college, the one who never said no to an adventure." He was right. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost that version of myself. I'd become someone who meal prepped on Sundays and went to bed at 10 p.m. and worried about retirement savings. But tonight, with Rafa's arm around my shoulders and the city spread out below us, I felt like myself again. It was nearly 4 a.m. when I finally made it home. Caleb's car was in the driveway, and I could see the glow of his laptop through the study window. Probably working, even at this hour. The man never knew how to just relax. I tried to be quiet as I let myself in, but the alcohol and exhaustion made me clumsy. My keys clattered to the floor, and I cursed under my breath as I bent to pick them up. "Otily?" Caleb's voice came from the study. "Yeah, it's me," I called back, kicking off my heels and padding toward the stairs. "Just getting home." "How was your night?" There was something in his tone I couldn't quite identify. Not anger exactly, something colder. "It was good, really good actually. I forgot how much fun it is to just let loose sometimes." I waited for him to say something else, maybe ask about where we went or who I was with. But the house fell silent. When I peeked into the study, he was staring at his laptop screen, his face illuminated by the blue glow. "Coming to bed?" I asked. "I'll be up in a while. I'm in the middle of something." I shrugged and headed upstairs. If he wanted to work all night instead of spending time with his wife, that was his choice. I'd had more fun in one evening with Rafa than I'd had in months with Caleb. It wasn't until I woke up the next afternoon that I realized Caleb had slept in the guest room. His side of the bed was still made, the pillows undisturbed. When I found him in the kitchen, making his methodical Saturday morning breakfast, he barely looked up. "Sleep well?" he asked, but it didn't sound like he really wanted an answer. "Yeah, great. You should have come out with us. You might have actually enjoyed yourself for once." He didn't respond, just continued buttering his toast with the same precise movements he used for everything. Cut the toast diagonally, butter spread evenly to all corners, jam applied in a thin, uniform layer. God, even watching him eat breakfast was boring. My phone buzzed with notifications from the night before. More likes on my posts, comments from friends saying how amazing I looked, how much fun it seemed like I was having. Rafa had tagged me in several photos, including one of us dancing that had already gotten over 100 likes. "Looks like you had quite the audience last night," Caleb said quietly. I looked up to find him staring at my phone screen. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just an observation." But there was something in his tone that made me defensive. "I'm allowed to have friends, Caleb. I'm allowed to go out and have fun sometimes." "I never said you weren't." "Then what's the problem? Why are you being so weird about this?" He was quiet for a long moment, chewing his toast with mechanical precision. Finally, he said, "No problem. I'm glad you had fun." But it didn't feel like he meant it. It felt like the beginning of something else entirely. Monday morning at the office started with Nate Anders practically bouncing over to my cubicle, his coffee in hand and a huge grin on his face. "Girl, you were on fire Saturday night," he said, perching on the edge of my desk. "I've been showing everyone your videos. You looked amazing." I felt a warm flush of pride. It had been so long since anyone had complimented me like that. At home, Caleb barely seemed to notice when I got dressed up, but Nate and the others had made me feel like a goddess. "It was exactly what I needed," I said, pulling up Instagram on my computer. The photos from Saturday night had continued to gain likes and comments throughout the weekend. "I forgot how good it feels to just be myself, you know." "Absolutely. And can we talk about how cute you and Rafa look together? I mean, I know you're married and all, but the chemistry in these photos is undeniable." I laughed, but something about his comment made me glance around the office. A few of my co-workers were looking our way, and I couldn't tell if their expressions were curious or judgmental. "We're just friends," I said, but even as I said it, I was scrolling through the photos Rafa had posted. Nate was right. We did look good together. Happy, alive. Everything I didn't feel when I looked at the rare photos Caleb and I took together these days. "If you say so," Nate said with a wink, "but I'm just saying, if I had a friend who looked at me the way Rafa looks at you in these pictures..." He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. I found myself staring at one photo in particular. Rafa's arm around my waist as we laughed at something off camera, both of us glowing under the club lights. We looked like a couple. More than that, we looked like a couple who actually enjoyed each other's company. The morning flew by in a blur of compliments and attention. It seemed like half the office had seen my posts over the weekend, and everyone wanted to hear about my night out. For the first time in years, I felt interesting. I felt like someone worth talking to. It wasn't until just before lunch that Janet from HR appeared at my cubicle, her expression serious. "Otily, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" My stomach dropped. Janet only did private conversations when there was a problem. I followed her to her office, my mind racing through possible explanations for why I was being called in. "Have a seat," Janet said, closing the door behind us. "I wanted to talk to you about your social media presence." "My social media? What about it?" Janet pulled out a printed screenshot of one of my Instagram posts from Saturday night. In it, I was dancing with Rafa, my head thrown back in laughter, his hands on my waist. The caption read, "When your best friend shows you how to really live, jar best friend goals, jar living my best life, jar worth it." "Several employees have brought this to my attention," Janet said carefully, "along with some of your other recent posts. While we don't typically monitor employee social media, when it becomes a topic of office conversation, we have to address it." I felt heat rising in my cheeks. "I don't understand the problem. I went out with friends on the weekend. That's not against company policy." "The issue isn't that you went out, Otily. The issue is the nature of these posts and how they're being perceived. You're listed as married in your employee file, but these photos and captions are, well, they're raising questions about your personal situation." "What kind of questions?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "The kind that create gossip and distraction in the workplace. I've had 3 separate people ask me if you and your husband are having problems. and whether your relationship with this Rafa person is appropriate. I stared at the printed screenshot, seeing it through different eyes. When I'd posted it, I'd been thinking about how free and happy I looked. I hadn't considered how it might appear to others, especially people who knew I was married. I think people are reading too much into innocent fun, I said defensively. Rafa is my friend. I'm allowed to have male friends. Of course you are, but I need you to consider how your online presence reflects on both you and the company. We've had situations before where employee social media has created complications. Janet's tone was gentle but firm. I could tell this wasn't just a casual conversation, it was a warning. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I really did. I'll be more careful about what I post. I appreciate that. And Otily, I'm not trying to police your personal life. I'm just asking you to think about the message you're sending, both professionally and personally. The walk back to my cubicle felt like a walk of shame. I could feel eyes on me, and I wondered how many of my coworkers had been talking about my weekend activities. When I sat down at my desk, Nate immediately swiveled his chair toward me. Everything okay? You look upset. Just some HR nonsense, I said, but my voice came out sharper than I intended. Apparently, having fun on the weekend is now a corporate concern. That's ridiculous. You weren't doing anything wrong. Exactly. I felt vindicated by his support. I'm a grown woman. I can post whatever I want on my own social media. But even as I said it, doubt was creeping in. I pulled up the photos again, trying to see them objectively. Did Rafa and I look too close? Were the captions too suggestive? Or were people just jealous that I was finally living my life instead of being a boring housewife? The rest of the day dragged by. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, reading and rereading the comments on my posts. Most of them were positive, friends telling me I looked amazing, asking where we'd gone, wanting to join us next time. But now I noticed the ones that weren't. A former coworker had written, "Doesn't she have a husband?" with a confused emoji. An old college friend had commented, "Living dangerously, I see." By the time I got home that evening, I was exhausted and irritated. Caleb was in the kitchen, preparing dinner with his usual methodical precision. He'd laid out all the ingredients in neat rows, measured everything exactly, and was following a recipe he'd probably made 100 times before. "How was work?" he asked without looking up from the cutting board. "Annoying. HR decided to stick their nose into my personal business." Now he did look up, his grey eyes focusing on me with sudden intensity. "What kind of personal business?" "My social media posts from Saturday night. Apparently, some people have too much time on their hands and not enough drama in their own lives." Caleb was quiet for a moment, his knife suspended over a half-chopped onion. "What did HR say exactly?" "Just that people were gossiping about the photos, making assumptions about my friendship with Rafa." I rolled my eyes, as if I can't have male friends without it being some big scandal. "Maybe you should show me these posts." Something in his tone made me defensive. "Why? So you can side with HR and tell me I'm doing something wrong too?" "I just want to understand what happened." "What happened is that I had fun for once in my life, and now everyone wants to make it into something it's not, including you, apparently." I stormed upstairs before he could respond, but I could feel his eyes on me as I left. In our bedroom, I threw myself onto the bed and pulled out my phone, scrolling through the weekend's posts again. Maybe I'd been a little careless with my captions. Maybe some of the photos were a bit too intimate for a married woman to be posting with another man. But so what? Caleb certainly didn't seem to care about being intimate with me anymore. When was the last time he'd held me the way Rafa had on the dance floor? When was the last time he'd looked at me with the kind of admiration I'd seen in Rafa's eyes? A text from Rafa popped up on my screen. "Hope you survived Monday. Still can't stop smiling about Saturday night. When's round 2? I found myself smiling as I typed back, "Soon, I hope. I need something to look forward to." His response came immediately. "You deserve to be happy, Otily. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for that. He was right. I did deserve to be happy. I deserved to feel alive and wanted and appreciated. If other people couldn't understand that, if they wanted to twist my friendship with Rafa into something ugly, that was their problem. When Caleb came upstairs later that night, I pretended to be asleep. I heard him moving around the room quietly, getting ready for bed with the same routine he followed every single night. Brush teeth for exactly 2 minutes, set out clothes for the next day, check his phone one last time, set the alarm for 6:15 a.m. But instead of getting into bed beside me, I heard him walk back toward the door. "Caleb," I called softly. "I'm going to sleep in the guest room again," he said without turning around. "I don't want to disturb you." The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone in our king-size bed. Part of me wanted to go after him, to explain that the photos didn't mean anything, that Rafa was just a friend who made me feel good about myself. But a bigger part of me was angry that I had to explain anything at all. I was 32 years old. I had every right to go out with friends, to post photos, to feel attractive and desirable. If Caleb couldn't handle that, if he was going to punish me with silent treatments and separate bedrooms, then maybe the problem wasn't my behavior. Maybe the problem was that I'd married someone who would never understand what it meant to truly live. I picked up my phone and scrolled through Rafa's Instagram, looking at all the adventures he documented, all the beautiful people in his life, all the evidence of an existence filled with spontaneity and joy. This was the life I wanted. This was the person I wanted to be. And if that made me the villain in other people's stories, then so be it. The next few weeks fell into a strange routine. Caleb continued sleeping in the guest room, claiming he didn't want to wake me when he got up early for his morning runs. During the day, he was polite but distant, asking about my day and commenting on the weather, like we were roommates instead of husband and wife. But I was starting to notice other changes too. Changes that made me uncomfortable in ways I couldn't quite articulate. He'd always been organized. It was one of the things that had attracted me to him initially, after years of dating guys who couldn't remember to pay their bills on time. But now his organization seemed to have taken on an almost obsessive quality. Every surface in the house was spotless. Every item had its designated place. And everything was documented. I first noticed it on a Thursday morning when I was looking for our insurance paperwork to update my beneficiaries at work. I went to the filing cabinet in his study, expecting to find the usual organized but reasonable system he'd always maintained. Instead, I found something that made my blood run cold. Every folder was labeled with precise typed labels, not just insurance and mortgage like before, but specific categories: auto insurance, policy changes, health insurance, claims 2023, home insurance, correspondence. Each folder was color-coded and arranged in perfect alphabetical order, but it was the new folders that really caught my attention. Household phone records, household bank statements, household social media activity. Social media activity? I pulled out the folder with shaking hands. Inside were printed screenshots of my Instagram posts, organized by date, not just from the past few weeks, but going back months. Every photo, every caption, every comment thread, all of it printed out and filed away like evidence in a court case. "What the hell?" I whispered, flipping through page after page of my own social media presence. He'd documented everything, including posts I'd forgotten about, photos from girls' nights out, captions about needing adventure, comments from male friends, all of it preserved in black and white. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten timeline in Caleb's precise script. March 15th, first mention of Rafa in Instagram, post March 22nd, dinner with Rafa, posted photo with caption, "Finally someone who gets my humor." April 3rd, girls' night out, multiple posts about needing more excitement. April 18th, club night with Rafa, Multiple videos and photos posted. April 19th, slept in guest room, first time. April 20th, HR meeting regarding social media posts. The list went on and on, documenting every interaction, every post, every night he'd slept in the guest room. It read like a police report, clinical and thorough, and completely terrifying. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly shoved the folder back into the cabinet, my heart pounding. When Caleb appeared in the doorway of the study, I was standing by the window trying to look casual. "Looking for something?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Just the car insurance info. I need to add roadside assistance to my policy." "It's in the auto insurance folder, under current policies." He walked over to the filing cabinet and pulled out the exact folder I needed, handing it to me without meeting my eyes. His movements were precise, economical, like everything he did these days. "Thanks," I said, clutching the folder against my chest. "You're really organized." I like to keep track of important things. There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. His face was calm, almost expressionless, but his grey eyes seemed to be studying me with an intensity that made me squirm. "Right. Well, I'll just take this to work and make copies." "No need. I already made copies of everything we might need. They're in the auto insurance copies folder." Of course they were. I forced a smile and headed for the door, but his voice stopped me. "Otily?" "Yeah. I'm meeting with our financial advisor this afternoon, just to review our accounts, make sure everything's in order." "Okay. Any particular reason?" "Just being thorough. I've scheduled a few other appointments too, with our lawyer, our insurance agent, that sort of thing. Spring cleaning, you could say." I nodded and left the study, but my hands were shaking as I walked upstairs. Spring cleaning. Who needed to meet with a lawyer for spring cleaning? That evening, I found myself paying more attention to Caleb's behavior. He moved through the house like he was conducting an inventory, straightening items that were already straight, checking locks that were already secure. During dinner, he asked me questions that seemed casual on the surface, but felt like an interrogation. "How was your day?" he asked, cutting his chicken into precise, uniform pieces. "Fine. Busy. The usual." "Any plans for the weekend?" I hesitated. Rafa had texted me about another night out, but after finding that folder, I wasn't sure I wanted to give Caleb more ammunition for his bizarre documentation project. "Nothing concrete. Maybe just a quiet night in." "That sounds nice. We haven't spent much time together lately." There was no accusation in his voice, no emotion at all, really. It was the same tone he might use to comment on the weather or the evening news, but something about it made me defensive. "Well, you've been pretty busy with all your appointments and organization projects." "Just trying to get our affairs in order. It's important to be prepared." "Prepared for what?" He looked up at me then, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker behind his calm exterior. "For whatever comes next." That night, I lay in our empty bed staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what was happening. The man I'd married had been organized, yes, but he'd also been warm, affectionate. We'd laughed together, made plans together, talked about our future like it was something we were building as a team. This version of Caleb felt like a stranger, methodical and distant and somehow threatening, even though he'd never raised his voice or made a single aggressive move. It was like living with a robot that had been programmed to look like my husband, but was missing some essential human component. My phone buzzed with a text from Rafa. "Miss you. When can we hang out again? I have some new places I want to show you." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Soon. I really need to get out of this house." His reply came immediately. "Everything okay? You sound stressed." "Just dealing with some weirdness at home, nothing I can't handle." "You know I'm here if you need to talk, right? Or if you just need to escape for a while." The kindness in his message made my eyes water. When was the last time Caleb had offered to listen to my problems? When was the last time he'd made me feel like my feelings mattered? "Thank you. That means more than you know." You deserve to be treated like the amazing woman you are, Otily. Don't let anyone make you forget that. I took a screenshot of his message before I could stop myself. Not to show anyone else, just to keep for myself. Evidence that someone in my life still saw me as worth caring about. It wasn't until I was drifting off to sleep that I realized what I'd done. I'd created exactly the kind of digital trail that Caleb was apparently documenting. Another piece of evidence for his growing collection of my betrayals and failures as a wife. But as I closed my eyes, I found I didn't care. If he wanted to document my friendship with Rafa, let him. If he wanted to catalogue every moment of happiness I found outside our increasingly cold marriage, that was his choice. I was done apologizing for wanting more than this sterile, joyless existence. I was done pretending that his obsessive organization was normal, or that his emotional withdrawal was something I deserved. Tomorrow, I decided, I would text Rafa back and make plans for the weekend, and if Caleb wanted to add it to his precious files, he was welcome to it. After all, what was the worst that could happen? The rooftop bar Rafa chose for Friday night was everything our life at home wasn't. Vibrant, spontaneous, alive with possibility. The city sparkled below us as we settled into a corner booth with his usual crowd. Nate from work, a few of Rafa's club promoter friends, and some people I didn't recognize but who welcomed me like I'd always been part of their group. To Otily, Rafa said, raising his cocktail in a toast, for remembering that life's too short to play it safe. Everyone clinked glasses, and I felt that familiar rush of being seen, being celebrated, being the center of attention in a way that made me feel truly alive. I pulled out my phone to capture the moment, all of us laughing and beautiful in the golden hour light filtering across the rooftop. "This is perfect," I said, posting the photo to Instagram with the caption, "Surrounded by people who get it. Sometimes you have to choose your own family." Chose my tribe. Rooftop vibes. Living authentically. The likes started pouring in immediately, along with comments from friends asking where we were, saying how radiant I looked, telling me they were jealous of my fabulous life. Each notification was like a small hit of validation, proof that I was interesting and desirable and worth envying. "You're glowing," said Melissa, one of Rafa's friends I'd just met. "Seriously, you look like a completely different person than in your older photos." I knew she meant it as a compliment, but something about it made me uncomfortable. "Different how?" "Happier, more confident, like you've finally figured out who you really are." Rafa squeezed my shoulder. "That's what happens when you stop letting other people dim your light." I knew he was talking about Caleb, and part of me wanted to defend my husband. But what was there to defend? The man who documented my every move like a private investigator. The man who slept in a separate room and treated me like a roommate he barely tolerated. "You're right," I said, leaning into Rafa's warmth. "I spent too long trying to be someone I'm not." As the evening progressed, I found myself posting more frequently than usual. Photos of our drinks, videos of the sunset, group shots that showed how effortlessly I fit into this world of beautiful, carefree people. Each post felt like a declaration of independence, a public statement that I refused to be contained by anyone else's expectations. It wasn't until Nate pointed it out that I realized how many of my captions had become subtle digs at my home life. "Girl, you are serving some serious living my best life despite the haters' energy tonight," he said, scrolling through my recent posts. "Is everything okay at home?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "What do you mean?" "I mean, sometimes you have to choose your own family. Stop letting other people dim your light. It sounds like you're sending a message to someone specific." Was I? I looked back at my posts from the evening, seeing them with fresh eyes. Had I really been that obvious about my frustration with Caleb? Or was Nate reading too much into innocent captions? "I'm just expressing myself," I said defensively. "Is that not allowed?" "Of course it is. I'm just saying, if you're having problems at home, you know you can talk to us, right? We've all been there." The concern in his voice was genuine, and I felt a sudden urge to unload everything: the filing cabinets full of documentation, the separate bedrooms, the way Caleb had become a stranger in his own home. But something held me back. Maybe it was loyalty to my marriage, or maybe it was the fear that saying it out loud would make it real. "I'm fine," I said instead. "Really, I'm just learning to prioritize my own happiness for once." Rafa appeared at my elbow with fresh drinks. "That's my girl," he said, wrapping an arm around my waist. "Life's too short to waste on people who don't appreciate what they have." The photographer in me couldn't resist capturing the moment. Rafa's arm around me, both of us smiling into the camera, the city lights twinkling behind us. It was the kind of photo that belonged in a magazine, the kind of image that told a story about a life well lived. I posted it immediately with the caption, "Grateful for friends who see your worth when others take it for granted. Blessed us true connection at worth it." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Heart emojis, fire symbols, comments about how perfect we looked together, how happy I seemed, how lucky I was to have such an amazing friend. But buried in the positive feedback were other comments that made my stomach twist. "Doesn't she have a husband?" someone wrote. "This looks like more than friendship to me." "Girl, be careful. This is giving me affair vibes." I started to delete the negative comments, but they kept coming. And the more I deleted, the more defensive I became. These people didn't know my life. They didn't know what it was like to live with someone who treated you like a business partner instead of a wife. They didn't understand that I was just trying to reclaim a piece of myself that had been slowly suffocating. By the time I got home that night, I was riding a wave of righteous indignation. Let people think whatever they wanted to think. Let them judge me for finally putting myself first for once. I was done caring about other people's opinions. The house was dark except for the glow coming from under Caleb's study door. I could hear the quiet clicking of his keyboard, probably updating his obsessive documentation of my evening. Well, I'd certainly given him plenty to document tonight. I climbed the stairs to our empty bedroom, not bothering to check on him. If he wanted to spend his Friday night cataloguing my social media posts instead of spending time with his wife, that was his choice. But as I was getting ready for bed, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Caleb appeared in the doorway, still dressed in his work clothes, holding a manila folder in his hands. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. "About what?" "About this." He held up the folder, and I could see my name written on the tab in his precise handwriting. "About what you're doing, about what it means. I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." He stepped into the room, and I noticed he was carrying himself differently, straighter, more purposeful. "I've been very patient, Otily. I've given you space to work through whatever this is. But tonight's posts cross a line." "What line?" "I went out with friends. I posted some photos. Since when is that a crime?" "Since you started posting photos that make it look like you're having an affair." The word hung in the air between us like a slap. I felt my face burn with anger and something else. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "That's ridiculous. Rafa is my friend. Just because you don't understand friendship doesn't mean—" "Show me your phone." "What?" "Your phone. Show me your text messages with Rafa. Show me what you've been deleting before you come home." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "I'm not showing you anything. You don't get to demand to see my private conversations." "Private conversations with the man you're having an emotional affair with." "I'm not having an affair, emotional or otherwise." But even as I said it, I could hear how hollow it sounded. "Just because you've become a cold, distant stranger doesn't mean I'm cheating on you." Cold and distant? For the first time in weeks, I saw real emotion flicker across Caleb's face. "I've been watching my wife fall in love with another man in real time, documented in high definition across social media for everyone to see. Forgive me if I haven't been particularly warm lately." "You're being dramatic and paranoid. Maybe you should talk to someone about these trust issues." But he wasn't listening anymore. He was opening the folder, pulling out printed screenshots of my posts from the evening. Seeing them in black and white, removed from the warm glow of the rooftop bar, they looked different, more intimate, more damning. Grateful for friends who see your worth when others take it for granted, he read aloud. Sometimes you have to choose your own family. Stop letting other people dim your light. Should I go on? Those are just captions, Caleb. You're reading way too much into... Am I? Because it seems pretty clear to me that you're publicly humiliating your husband while flaunting your relationship with another man. His voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath it now. The question is whether you're doing it on purpose, or if you're just too caught up in your fantasy to see how it looks. I stared at him, this man I'd married, this stranger who was confronting me with evidence of my own behavior like a prosecutor in a courtroom. When had we become these people? When had our marriage become a legal proceeding? You know what? I said, my voice shaking with anger. Maybe I am choosing my own family. Maybe I am done letting other people dim my light, because this, I gestured between us, this isn't a marriage anymore. It's a surveillance operation. Caleb nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he'd suspected. Okay, he said quietly. Good to know where we stand. He turned to leave, but stopped at the doorway. Just so you know, I've scheduled a meeting with a lawyer next week to discuss our options. What kind of options? But he was already walking away, leaving me alone with the printed evidence of my evening scattered across the bed like accusations I couldn't deny. I picked up one of the photos, Rafa and me smiling into the camera, looking for all the world like a couple celebrating their happiness. Is that really what it looked like to everyone else? Is that what I wanted it to look like? My phone buzzed with a text from Rafa. Had the best time tonight. You're amazing, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Sweet dreams. Beautiful. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. But the damage was already done. Somewhere in this house, Caleb was probably adding tonight's events to his growing file of evidence, building a case against me with the methodical precision he applied to everything else in his life. And for the first time since this all began, I wondered if maybe he had a point. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of mounting tension and careful avoidance. Caleb and I moved around each other, like polite strangers, sharing the same space, but existing in completely separate worlds. He continued his mysterious appointments and documentation projects, while I threw myself into work and tried to ignore the growing sense that something was building toward an inevitable conclusion. I'd pulled back from social media after our confrontation, posting only the occasional work-related update or innocuous photo of my coffee. The attention from my night out posts had died down, but the comments and questions from friends and co-workers continued. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about my marriage, my friendship with Rafa, and what it all meant. You've been quiet lately, Nate observed on Thursday afternoon, perching on the edge of my desk with his usual coffee. No more fabulous night out posts. Just taking a break from all that, I said, not looking up from my computer screen. Everything okay at home? The concern in his voice made me look at him. Nate had been one of my biggest cheerleaders throughout this whole situation, encouraging me to live my best life and not worry about what other people thought. But now he seemed genuinely worried. Define okay, I said with a bitter laugh. Yikes, that bad? I glanced around the office to make sure no one was listening, then lowered my voice. Caleb's been acting really strange, like obsessively documenting everything I do, sleeping in the guest room, having mysterious meetings with lawyers and financial advisors. Lawyers? Nate's eyes widened. Otily, that sounds like... I know what it sounds like. But I keep telling myself it can't be that. I mean, we've been together for 8 years. We have a life together. He can't just throw it all away because I've been going out with friends. But even as I said it, I could hear how naive I sounded. The evidence was all there. The separate bedrooms, the cold politeness, the way he'd started talking about getting our affairs in order, like he was preparing for something final. Maybe you should talk to a lawyer too, Nate said quietly. Just to protect yourself. The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. It's not going to come to that. We're just going through a rough patch. All marriages have rough patches. But that afternoon, I found myself Googling divorce lawyers on my work computer, just in case. The websites were full of advice about protecting your assets and documenting your spouse's behavior and preparing for custody battles. It all seemed so clinical and brutal, nothing like the life Caleb and I had built together. When I got home that evening, I found him in the kitchen making dinner for one. A single chicken breast, a small portion of vegetables, one place setting at the table. The sight of it made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "Not hungry?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "I wasn't sure when you'd be home. I can make more if you want." "That's okay. I'll just grab something later." We stood there for a moment in awkward silence, the space between us feeling vast despite the small kitchen. This was the man I'd promised to love for better or worse, in sickness and in health. When had we become so polite with each other? When had we stopped being a team? "Caleb," I started, not sure what I wanted to say but feeling like I had to try. "Maybe we should talk, really talk, I mean, about what's been happening between us." He looked at me with those grey eyes that used to make me feel safe and loved. Now they just looked tired. "What would you like to talk about?" "About us. About how we got to this place. About whether there's a way to fix it." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Hope, maybe, or longing. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "I think it's too late for that conversation, Otily." "Why? Because I've been going out with friends? Because I posted some photos you didn't like? That's not grounds for giving up on 8 years together." "It's not about the photos. It's about what they represent. It's about the fact that you've been emotionally investing in another man while treating me like a roommate you barely tolerate." His words stung because they held more truth than I wanted to admit. When was the last time I'd looked forward to coming home to Caleb? When was the last time I'd chosen to spend time with him instead of making plans with Rafa? "I never meant for it to go this far," I said quietly. "But it did go this far, and now we both have to live with the consequences." That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment that had led us to this point. The first time Rafa had made me laugh, when Caleb seemed too busy to notice. The first photo we'd taken together that made me feel beautiful and desired. The first time I'd chosen his attention over my husband's presence. Had I been having an emotional affair? The label felt too harsh, too dramatic, for what had felt like innocent friendship. But looking back with honest eyes, I could see how it must have appeared to Caleb, and to everyone else who'd been watching my social media transformation. My phone buzzed with a text from Rafa. "Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay? Miss talking to you." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. For the first time since this all began, the attention that had once felt so validating now felt complicated and heavy. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor to my office. Janet from HR appeared at my cubicle just before lunch, her expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "Otily, I need you to come with me. We have a situation." My stomach dropped. "What kind of situation?" "Just come with me, please." I followed her to her office on unsteady legs, my mind racing through possibilities. Had someone complained about my work? Had my social media posts caused more problems than I'd realized? But when Janet closed the door and turned to face me, I could see this was something bigger than office gossip. "I received a call this morning from a law firm representing your husband," she said carefully. "They're requesting copies of your employment records, including any disciplinary actions or HR interventions." The room seemed to spin around me. "They're what?" "It appears your husband is building a case for divorce proceedings, and they want documentation of any workplace issues that might be relevant to the settlement." I sank into the chair across from her desk, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "This can't be happening. I'm sorry, Otily. I know this must be shocking. but I need you to know that we'll be required to comply with any legal requests for your employment records. What records? I haven't done anything wrong at work. Janet's expression was sympathetic but firm. Our previous conversation about your social media posts is documented in your file. Any future incidents would be as well. The implication was clear. I was being watched at work now too. Every move I made, every post I shared, every conversation I had was potentially evidence in a case I didn't even know was being built against me. How long have they been planning this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't have that information, but based on the thoroughness of their request, I'd say this has been in the works for some time. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, barely able to concentrate on work. Every few minutes, I'd remember another piece of evidence Caleb had been collecting. The documented timeline, the printed social media posts, the mysterious appointments. He'd been building a case against me for weeks, maybe months, while I'd been completely oblivious. When I got home that evening, the house felt different. Caleb's car was in the driveway, but something about the atmosphere made my skin crawl. I found him in his study, sitting at his desk with several manila folders spread out in front of him. "We need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway. He looked up at me with an expression I couldn't read. "I was wondering when you'd find out." "Find out what? That you've been planning to divorce me behind my back? That you've been treating our marriage like a legal case you're trying to win?" "I've been protecting myself, Otily. Something you might want to consider doing." "Protecting yourself from what? From your wife having friends? From someone finally making me feel appreciated and valued? From someone who's been publicly humiliating me while carrying on an emotional affair with another man?" There was that phrase again, emotional affair. But this time, I couldn't muster the energy to deny it. Maybe because I was finally starting to understand that it didn't matter what I called it. What mattered was what it had done to my marriage, to Caleb, to the life we'd built together. "So this is it?" I asked. 8 years together, and you're just going to throw it all away without even trying to work things out? "I tried to work things out, Otily. I tried being patient. I tried giving you space. I tried talking to you about what was happening. But you were too busy living your best life with Rafa to notice that your husband was drowning." His words hit me like a physical blow. When had he tried to talk to me? When had he expressed that he was struggling? But even as I asked myself these questions, I knew the answers were there if I was honest enough to see them. The quiet attempts at conversation I'd brushed off. The invitations to spend time together I'd declined in favor of nights out. The way he'd withdrawn more each time I'd chosen Rafa's attention over his presence. "I never meant to hurt you," I said, and for the first time in months I meant it completely. "I know," he said quietly, "but you did hurt me, and now we both have to live with what comes next." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman I'd been 8 years ago when Caleb and I first got together. She'd been so different from the person I'd become. Less confident maybe, but also less selfish. She'd seen Caleb's quiet strength as something to admire, not something to be bored by. She'd appreciated his stability instead of craving drama and excitement. When had I stopped being that person? When had I started needing constant validation from strangers on social media? When had I begun to see my husband's love as something I was entitled to rather than something precious to be cherished? My phone sat silent on the nightstand. No text from Rafa, no notifications from Instagram, no external validation to distract me from the uncomfortable truth that was finally becoming clear. I had destroyed my marriage. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but through 1,000 small choices that had added up to something devastating. And now Caleb was doing exactly what I should have expected from someone with his methodical, thorough approach to everything. He was documenting the damage and preparing to move on with his life. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter in Caleb's precise handwriting. "Expect delivery Monday morning. C." I stared at the note for a long time, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Delivery of what? The divorce papers I'd been dreading? Some final piece of documentation for his case against me? Whatever it was, I knew it would change everything. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. Monday morning arrived grey and drizzling, matching my mood as I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring at Caleb's note from the weekend. Expect delivery Monday morning. The words had haunted me all weekend, and now that Monday was here, every sound from outside made my heart race. Caleb had left for work early, as he did every morning now, but not before setting out a single manila envelope on the counter with my name written across it in his careful script. Inside, I'd found a brief note. Otily, I'll be at the courthouse this morning handling final paperwork. The delivery should arrive by 10 a.m. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Caleb. At 9:47 a.m., a black sedan pulled into our driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as a woman in a business suit got out, carrying a leather portfolio. She walked up to our front door with the confident stride of someone who did this for a living. The doorbell rang, and my hand shook as I went to answer it. Otily Gray? The woman asked, consulting her paperwork. Yes. I'm Sarah Mitchell from Peterson, Hayes and Associates. I have documents that require your signature. She handed me a thick envelope with my name typed across the front in official letterhead. My hands trembled as I opened it, though I already knew what I would find inside. Petition for dissolution of marriage, I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. Along with temporary custody arrangements, asset division proposals, and a restraining order regarding social media posts that reference your husband or your marriage, Sarah added matter-of-factly. A restraining order? Your husband's attorney was very thorough. Any future posts, photos, or online content that could be construed as harassment, defamation, or invasion of privacy regarding Mr. Gray will result in contempt of court charges. I stared at the papers in my hands, pages and pages of legal language that reduced 8 years of marriage to a series of financial calculations and custody schedules. At the bottom of the first page, Caleb's signature was already there, neat and decisive. I need to sign this now. You have 30 days to respond with your own attorney, but the temporary orders go into effect immediately upon service, which is now. She handed me a pen and watched as I signed my name next to Caleb's, officially acknowledging that our marriage was over. The signature felt like the final nail in a coffin I'd been building for months without realizing it. Is there anything else? I asked, though I wasn't sure I could handle any more surprises. Just this. She handed me a smaller envelope with personal written across it in Caleb's handwriting. Mr. Gray asked me to deliver this along with the legal documents. After she left, I sat on our couch, my couch now, I supposed, and opened Caleb's personal note with shaking hands. Otily, it began, by the time you read this, the legal process will be underway. I want you to know that I didn't make this decision lightly or in anger. I made it because I finally understood that the woman I married disappeared somewhere along the way, and the woman who took her place doesn't want to be married to me. I've spent months documenting your behavior, not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I needed to protect myself from what I could see coming. Every post, every photo, every public declaration of how much happier you were with Rafa, it all told a story about where your heart really was. I loved you, Otily. I loved the woman who used to laugh at my terrible jokes and who used to see my quiet nature as strength instead of weakness. I loved the woman who used to choose me, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. But that woman is gone, and I can't keep pretending otherwise. You made it clear that your best friend ranked above your husband, and I finally took the hint. You'll find that I've been more than fair in the asset division. The house is yours. I know how much you love it. I've kept only what I need to start over. The custody arrangement is temporary, until we can work out something more permanent. but I think you'll find it reasonable. I hope you find what you're looking for, Otily. I really do. I just wish it could have been with me. Caleb P.S. You'll be served properly. That's what you wanted, isn't it? For someone to finally take action instead of just quietly accepting whatever you chose to give them. I read the letter 3 times before the full impact hit me. He'd been planning this for months. Every appointment, every document, every careful conversation, it had all been building toward this moment. While I'd been posting photos and seeking validation from strangers, he'd been methodically preparing to end our marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Lydia. Heard from Mum that Caleb called her this morning. She's on her way over. What's going on? Before I could respond, another text came in from Nate at work. Girl, people are saying there was a process server at your house this morning. Call me ASAP. Then another from Rafa. Hey beautiful, haven't heard from you in days, missing our conversations. I stared at Rafa's message, remembering all the times his attention had felt like a lifeline when my marriage was feeling stale. Now it just felt like evidence of how far I'd strayed from the person I used to be. I deleted his message without responding and called Lydia instead. Otily, what's happening? Mum said Caleb sounded really upset when he called her. He's divorcing me, I said, the words feeling surreal as I spoke them. It's over, Lydia. 8 years, and it's just over. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Do you want me to come over? Actually, yes. I think I need someone to help me understand how I got here. Lydia arrived 20 minutes later, finding me still sitting on the couch with the legal papers spread around me, like evidence of my own destruction. She took one look at the documents and let out a low whistle. He really did his homework, she said, flipping through the pages. This is incredibly thorough. Asset division, custody schedules, even a social media restriction order. He's been planning this for months. While I thought we were just going through a rough patch, he was building a legal case against me. Can you blame him? Lydia's question was gentle but direct. Otily, I love you, but you have to see how this looked from the outside. The constant posts about Rafa, the photos that looked more like date pictures than friend pictures, the captions about choosing your own family and finding people who appreciate you. I never cheated on him, physically, I mean. But emotionally? I was quiet for a long moment, finally ready to be honest with myself and with her. Yeah, I think maybe I did. Then he's not the villain here, honey. He's just someone who got tired of being publicly humiliated by his wife. The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent so long justifying my behavior, telling myself I was just having innocent fun with a friend, that I'd never stopped to consider how it must have felt for Caleb to watch me fall in love with someone else in real time. I destroyed my marriage, I said quietly. Yes, you did, but that doesn't mean you're a terrible person. It means you made some really bad choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. We spent the rest of the morning going through the legal documents, and I had to admit that Caleb had been more than fair. He'd left me the house, most of our savings, and had asked for minimal support. It was like he just wanted to escape cleanly, without punishing me financially for what I'd done emotionally. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Janet from HR. Otily, I'm calling to let you know that we've received the legal documents regarding your divorce proceedings. Given the social media restrictions that are now in place, and considering our previous conversations about your online presence, I think it would be best if you took some personal time to sort things out. Are you firing me? I'm suggesting you take a leave of absence until this situation resolves itself. Your job will be here when you're ready to come back, but right now, you need to focus on your personal situation. After I hung up, Lydia looked at me with sympathy. It's going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it? I think it already is worse. I just didn't want to see it. That afternoon, I drove to the courthouse where Caleb had said he'd be handling final paperwork. I wasn't sure what I hoped to accomplish. The papers were already served. The process was already in motion. but I felt like I needed to see him one more time. I found him coming down the courthouse steps, carrying a briefcase and looking more composed than I'd seen him in months. When he saw me, he stopped but didn't approach. "Otily?" "Caleb." I walked toward him, noting how he stood straighter now, more confident. "I got your letter." "Good. I wanted you to understand that this wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about self-preservation." "I know. And I know I don't have any right to ask this, but was there ever a chance we could have worked through this? If I had stopped, if I had chosen differently?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Maybe. A few months ago, maybe. But not after you made it clear that I ranked below Rafa in your priorities. Not after you turned our marriage into a public spectacle. I never meant for it to go that far. But it did go that far, and now here we are." We stood there in the grey afternoon light, two people who had once promised to love each other forever, now reduced to legal proceedings and asset division. "For what it's worth," I said finally, "I'm sorry. For all of it. For hurting you, for humiliating you, for throwing away something that was probably worth saving." "I know you are. But sorry doesn't undo the damage, Otily. Sorry doesn't erase the photos or the posts, or the months of watching you choose someone else over and over again." He started to walk away, then turned back one more time. "You wanted someone who would fight for you, who would make grand gestures and create drama. But I'm not that person. I'm someone who documents the facts, follows the law, and handles things properly." He gestured toward the courthouse behind him. "You'll be served properly, Otily, just like you always wanted." I watched him walk to his car and drive away, leaving me standing alone on the courthouse steps with the weight of my choices finally settling around me like a heavy coat. 6 months later, the divorce was final. I kept the house, just as Caleb had arranged, but it felt empty and hollow without him in it. I'd lost most of our mutual friends, who had sided with Caleb after seeing the evidence of my emotional affair laid out in legal documents. My job was still there when I returned from leave, but the gossip and whispers followed me for months. Rafa had disappeared from my life as quickly as he'd entered it, moving on to other adventures and other women who made him feel interesting. Without the drama of a forbidden friendship, he'd lost interest in our connection entirely. I learned to live alone, to find validation from within instead of from social media likes and comments from strangers. I learned to appreciate quiet evenings and simple pleasures, the things I'd once found boring when I was married to a man who had offered them freely. But most importantly, I learned that actions have consequences, and that sometimes the person you hurt the most is yourself. Caleb had been right about everything. I had made my choices clear, and he had finally taken the hint. He'd served me properly, just as he'd promised, and in the end, I got exactly what I'd asked for: the freedom to choose my own path, and the responsibility to live with where that path led me.